Welcome back to Pat Psychology Masters. Today I'm going to be talking about two different types of synesthesia. The first being mirror touch synesthesia and the second being grapheme colour synesthesia. Now, if you're not familiar with synesthesia, it is a fascinating psychological and neuroscientific phenomenon, and it refers to a curious mingling of the senses which different people experience. Now, a light was shone on mirror touch synesthesia and grapheme colour synesthesia for me by an excellent paper by Alan Dowd, Sarah Cooney, David McGovern and Fiona Newell, four fantastic Irish researchers who asked the question 2 years ago, does synesthesia and mental imagery tap into similar brain processes? Now, you can get into the nitty-gritty of that paper by clicking on the link in the description. I'm just going to be giving you a whirlwind tour of what these types of synesthesia are. So I described synesthesia as a curious mingling of the senses. I love that description because synesthesia certainly have a curious experience of the world when you compare it to, let's say, my normative experience of the world. In a sense, I'd love to really appreciate what a synesthete experiences by travelling into their mind. So, for example, if I was a mirror touch synesthete and I observed somebody's left arm being rubbed from their elbow to their wrist, well, despite not being touched from my elbow to my wrist, purely by observing, I might actually feel a tactile sensation run along my arm in a corresponding pattern. So this is the normal experience for about 1.6% of the population, and 1.6% of the population are thought to have this experience of mirror touch synesthesia. What seems to be involved in mirror touch synesthesia is the mirror neuron system. So our mirror neuron system is a brain network which is responsible for perspective taking. When we imagine walking in another person's shoes, we are perspective taking. We are activating our mirror neuron system to try and understand what it's like to basically be in the mind of another person. Remember I described how I'd love to imagine myself in the shoes of a synesthete for a moment to see how they experience the world? Well, when I do that imagination exercise, I'm activating my mirror neuron system. Now, in that example I described, where a mirror touch synesthete might feel the same pattern of activation, tactile, on their arm when they observe somebody else being touched, their mirror neuron system is activated, and it's thought that it's activated to a much larger degree than, let's say, the average person when they just imagine themselves walking in another person's shoes. So that's a short description of mirror touch synesthesia. Well, what about grapheme colour synesthesia? The difference between these two types of synesthesia just speaks to the diversity of synesthesia which manifests in different people. Grapheme colour synesthesia occurs when people associate a particular colour with a letter. So, for instance, a grapheme synesthete, when they see the letter H, they might also experience the colour yellow, and it's very, very curious as the description of synesthesia is, a curious mingling of the senses. So before I continue, let me bring you back in time to 1974 to tell you about Pinkerton and Humphrey's Nature paper, The Apparent Heaviness of Colours. So Pinkerton and Humphrey discovered that, generally speaking, people intuit a particular weight assigned to each colour, and each colour has a different weight assigned to it. They found that most people experience yellow as quite a light colour, whereas on the other end of the spectrum, blue and red seem to be heavier colours. There was a much heavier experience intuited towards these colours. Fast forward now to 2019. What O'Dowd and colleagues found was that letters have a weight that's intuited with them. And for grapheme synesthetes, this weight corresponds to the weight of the colour that is associated with it. So for instance, in that example I provided earlier, if I'm a grapheme synesthete and I imagine the letter H having a yellow association with it, well, that H will appear much lighter, whereas Z might evoke a red colour for me and in that instance it's going to have a heavier experience associated with it. The important finding from this paper was that the authors found evidence to suggest that perhaps synesthesia isn't very domain specific. Perhaps there is a blending of experience outside of the domain of just novelly experiencing a colour. Perhaps there's more than just a curious mingling of the senses, but a mingling of the senses which has meaningful consequences for how synesthetes experience the world. Now, as I suggested earlier, if you want to take a deeper dive, I'd highly recommend you click on the link in the description to access the full paper. Are you a mirror touch synesthete? Have you experiences of grapheme colour synesthesia? Perhaps you sometimes smell colours. I'd love to know your experiences in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Hit the thumbs up if you liked it. Hit the thumbs down if you didn't. And I'm excited to see you again here next week.